So what is a kiln? Well, basically a kiln is a box or a container that you can raise the temperature in. When you put your glass into that container, it raises the temperature up to its firing temperature. Now, dependent on whether you're using paints or enamels or stains, they all have a slightly different firing temperature. But essentially, paints are brought up to a temperature of around 660 degrees centigrade, which is about 1220 degrees Fahrenheit. And yellow silver stain is brought up to a slightly lower temperature of around 620 degrees centigrade, which is 1148 degrees Fahrenheit. Every kiln is different, however, and it's important to realize that the kiln that you're working with might fire your paints and might fire your stains and enamels at a slightly different temperature to the temperatures that I use in my kiln. So you have to experiment to a certain extent. Now, my favorite kiln at the moment, and the kiln that I use most often for things like teaching my students, is my gas kiln. The reason I like the gas kiln is because you can bring it up to temperature and it cools down relatively quickly. In fact, you can have a piece of painted glass put into the kiln and back in your hand in about an hour, which is really, really fast. If you're working with an electric kiln, it's a much slower cycle. The reason for that is the temperature is retained inside the body of an electric kiln for far longer. The insulation is far better. There are less holes for the heat to escape. I would recommend to you to try and buy a gas kiln if you can. The problem is, gas kilns aren't made anymore. The one company that was making gas kilns until relatively recently was a European company called Hoff, but they have now stopped making gas kilns. So the majority of you who are watching this video today will be using an electric kiln. And I also use an electric kiln. There's nothing wrong with them. They're absolutely fantastic. So in my studio, I have two types of kilns here. The first is the electric kiln. And this kiln has filaments, electric filaments in the roof of the kiln, which heat up the container. And the kiln bed here is where I put the glass to be fired. And you can see the bedding here is whiting. It's basically chalk, calcium carbonate. And that is the preferred material that I use when I'm doing all of my painted work. Now, this is my gas kiln. It's slightly different to the electric one insofar as it has got gas burners in the roof rather than electric filaments. And the great advantage of using a gas kiln is it heats up far faster. There's some glass here already in that's been fired, and again it's been placed into the whiting or the calcium carbonate. And the gas kiln is a really fast kiln for turning around things really quickly, where the electric kiln is much slower. It takes about 24 hours to go through the cycle. Whiting is basically calcium carbonate or chalk. You can find suppliers of chalk, usually at builders merchants, but I'll also link in the description below to where I source my whiting from. So this piece of glass here is what I've been using for years to smooth out my whiting with. It's basically a piece of 6mm. So the preparation for the whiting is very straightforward. I'm using my glass template to agitate the whiting like this, and then I'm pulling the glass template back across the whiting to level it out and create a nice flat surface onto which I can introduce my painted pieces. So here's a painted piece, putting it into the whiting and just gently pressing it down so that you get rid of any lumps and bumps and you get a nice flat surface for the glass. The great advantage of using whiting is it can be used time and time again. It's very often the case that I will work with the same whiting for maybe 2 months, 2 or 3 months, depends how much firing I'm doing. But if, for example, I'm firing something like enamels, I always fire enamels face up because they do absorb the whiting. So here I'm putting some yellow silver stain face down into the whiting, and that will get absorbed by the whiting over a period of time, and that's when you then have to change it. So this is the kind of situation that tells you you need to change your whiting. When the whiting starts to become corrupted and you get all kinds of stains and bits and pieces in the medium. I've been using this quite a lot over the last few weeks for a big project, and I've done a number of firings, but it gets to the point where it starts to look like this, where you're getting yellow silver stain and sort of, I don't know, just a whole lot of mess and crud in the whiting, and it really is time then to change the whiting. and to rebed it with new whiting. So I'll just take you through the process of what I use here. Now obviously it being whiting with a lot of residue, silver stain and things in there, I have to wear a mask and protect myself, because you don't want to be inhaling anything that might damage your lungs over the long term. I don't want to be breathing in those fibers. I don't want to be breathing in anything that might damage my lungs in the long term. So I wear a P3 mask. That is the standard mask that's used for particulates and for things that would create dusts, harmful dusts. So do your research and find in your country what the equivalent of a P3 mask would be. In addition to a mask, I'm wearing gloves as well, because you don't want to get any microfibers trapped in your skin when you're cleaning the kilns. Basically, take as much precaution as you possibly can just to ensure that you don't breathe the dust in or get any of fibers from the kiln onto your skin. I'm also using a vacuum cleaner here to get rid of all of the dust. It's quite a messy job, this, so it's something that you do have to prepare for and to try and keep the place clean. So this is the bed of the electric kiln, as you can see now, nice and clean, ready for a new layer of whiting. So I'm applying the whiting, a little bit like icing sugar on a cake. So I'm building up that layer in a nice smooth layer, so we're getting probably about a centimeters thickness of whiting on both of the kiln beds. There they are already now. So what we do before we can actually use them is we have to fire them once up to firing temperature. It's called a blind firing. No glass in here just now, simply firing the whiting up to temperature, and that burns out any of the impurities in the whiting and gets the whiting ready for use. And once we've done this one firing with nothing in it, we're ready to use it in subsequent firings. So I like to use whiting on the bed of my kiln as the preferred method for firing my glass. However, there is another method, and I'm just going to show you that now. In order to do that, we've got to go and visit a friend of mine who is another glass artist to just show you the process that she uses to fire her glass in her kiln. So we're travelling up the motorway to meet a husband and wife team who both make stained glass windows. Ian runs his own studio designing and making stained glass windows. His company is called ME Stained Glass, and literally next door to Ian's studios is Claire's studio, and she runs a stained glass studio designing and making new work.
Hi.
Hi Claire, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you.
It's fantastic to be back in the studio again, and I see you're busy teaching. You have some students working with you here today.
Yep, absolutely, lots going on.
And also you have been extremely busy on this project. Tell me a little bit about this.
This is a set of windows for Scampton Church up near Lincoln, and it is to celebrate the 80th anniversary of the 617 Squadron's formation, and they were the ones that did the Dam Busters raid.
I don't know if the camera's picking this up, but there are lots of different techniques at play here. You're using fused glass. I can see little diamonds here.
Yeah.
Some beautiful
These are
painted
using
details.
fused powders to build up layers to create a slightly more three-dimensional effect to get the different shades and tones in the poppies. So this goes at the top, in the middle, and this has got the cross of remembrance on it.
Absolutely beautiful. Now I've been following you on Facebook as this project's been developing, and one of the images particularly took my attention, apart from the beautiful artwork, was the kiln and the kiln shelf. And I'm making a tutorial today on kilns and how we glass artists work with kilns. Now I don't have a kiln shelf, but you do. Can you tell us a little bit about how you get on with the kiln shelf and how you use it in comparison to, say, instead of kiln paper or using any other products?
Well, I find with most of my work, I want a very flat surface. So I particularly like this very, very smooth surface. So I've got kind of different types of kiln shelves. I've got, this one's quite a large one, it's bought specially in. They're quite hard to get hold of, kiln shelves this large. With the smaller kilns, they tend to come with a kiln shelf. I'd strongly advise, if you ever buy a kiln, buy the kiln shelf that comes with it. They work really well. And then I backwash the kiln shelves, so if I'm doing paint work, it won't stick to the kiln shelf.
Just talk us through, if you can, the preparation of the kiln shelf if you're working specifically with painted glass.
Well, it's much easier with painted glass. You don't need an awful lot. You don't need to use fibre paper at all. Backwash is perfectly sufficient. I use this Bullseye shelf primer, mix it up. 1 part primer, 5 parts water. So big strokes and probably 5 layers, go opposite way each time, and it'll look quite pink. That's then fired up to 260 degrees, and that'll just get it ready for your first firing. The first firing, the shelf will still look a little pink, but after that it goes white like this, and it's just quite chalky.
Yeah.
And you can just use it repeatedly and repeatedly until it starts to deteriorate, then scrub it back and start again. Wear a mask, use a hoover. If it's thicker, you scrape it.
Yeah.
First, hoover it up. Generally got my box of gloves that I wear all the time for everything I do now. If nothing else, you don't want to keep having to get dirty hands and keep washing them all the time.
Exactly. Yeah, fantastic. So I can see here also this particular kiln has got holes all the way through. So I'm taking it that it's hollow on the inside. Yeah.
Yeah. I did have a thin, just single layer kiln shelf in there, but it cracked. I think it's just too thin and too big to accommodate it, and the heating up and the cooling down, it just couldn't cope with it, because I wanted it propped up off the floor so it would cool underneath. With these ones, they're so much more structurally strong. I've had that kiln shelf now for, I don't know, 15 years probably, and it's still going strong. They have to be level. You don't want a wobble in it. You don't want any adjustment in it. Any wobble can mean your shelf might crack. So get it nice and flat and straight, and it just helps with the cooling.
By the way, if you like the content on my channel, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel, as it really helps us get this information out to as many creatives as possible. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you soon.